how do you view the European Central Bank's decision to cut its deposit rate by 25 basis points? Is it the right move, or is it too conservative given the current economic climate?
I think it's the right move. And if you look at the ECB and how they've been moving on this interest rate reduction path, they've actually been moving pretty steadily and pretty consistently, unlike the Federal Reserve, which pauses and makes a decision. The ECB signal has been pretty clear. So the upcoming rate cut, which is expected for this week, I think is expected, and I think it's on the right path because economically, the Eurozone economies are growing below what their target rate is. At the same time, inflation is still above the target rate.
Mhm. Well, then how could President Trump's tariff threats impact the Eurozone and the ECB's ability to manage inflation and growth?
Well, obviously, nobody wants to see a trade war, and if we do see increase in tariffs, it will affect the ECB, I think, more, or the European Union more than it would affect the US, just because the European Union right now is at a weaker economic growth trajectory than the US is right now. So any increase in tariffs or trade wars will affect them directly, and it may lead the ECB to increase its interest rate reduction going forward to help balance out the increase in tariffs, which will result in an increase in inflation as well.
Then what challenges does the ECB face in navigating the differing opinions within the governing council on the pace of rate cuts?
Well, as I said, the pace of rate cuts as it stands right now has been very steadily and very predictable, which of course markets love. However, if we were to see a trade war or any kind of escalation in the trade relations, that could put this in doubt. And of course, investors do not like uncertainty, and this could create much more of a policy headache for the ECB than it is right now.
Mhm. Mr. Rifai, now the Eurozone inflation is rising to 2.4%, largely due to the energy costs. How can the ECB address inflation without worsening the growth risks?
Well, we've already heard the current U.S. president state that he wants to see energy costs come down. Already indicated that he's willing to help out the European Union in terms of exporting energy to Europe. So all of these will help in the rising energy costs. And of course, if back to the past year, one of the driving forces behind the reduction or the decline in the high inflation rates that we saw was because energy prices have come down dramatically, especially when we're talking about natural gas in Europe. So I think if this continues, yes, it will reduce the pressure on inflation. And that has been one of the main reasons why we see the cost of doing business in Europe, especially for the manufacturing companies like Volkswagen, like BASF, which have been complaining about high energy costs and trying to switch their production to other countries. Now I think that might be coming to an end, and of course, lower energy costs will be a huge benefit for the European Union.
So how much influence do you think the Federal Reserve's policies have on the ECB decision? How dictating is it, especially regarding the rate cuts or the pauses?
Well, ironically, when we talk about rising rates or lowering rates, historically, we've seen the Federal Reserve lead the markets or lead other central banks higher or lower. However, in this case, we saw the ECB was the first major central bank around the world to start lowering interest rates last year. So I think the ECB is pretty independent from the Federal Reserve. So any direction the Federal Reserve goes at this point, I think will be fairly independent from the ECB decisions, which I think is positive.
So you've mentioned that nobody wants to see any trade wars, but could the ongoing US-European Union trade tension shift the ECB's focus more towards managing external economic risks than internal ones?
That's always a concern, and I think, the ECB obviously has some internal problems. If you look at the labor force and other economic factors, as I mentioned, rising energy costs was a big decision why some German manufacturers have either shut down, lowered production, or moved production overseas. So if the ECB or if the European Union would like to see some of these problems solved, they need to look internally first. However, I don't think a trade war between U.S. and Europe, if it were to happen, like rising tariffs, et cetera, I don't think it will last long. I think it's in both parties' interest to try to resolve these matters, amicably and agree to terms quickly. So if there is any kind of rising tariffs, I think it will be short term. Long term, it's bad for everybody.